The day the HOA held a ribbon-cutting ceremony on my land, without permission, was the day my quiet tolerance snapped. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, because I didn't need to. I simply called the one person who could end the entire spectacle in seconds, my best friend, the county governor. And when he arrived and asked, "Who exactly owns this land?" the silence that followed was louder than any confrontation I could have imagined. I'm not a man who goes looking for trouble. At 61, I've seen enough nonsense in my life to know that peace is worth more than pride. My name is Barrett. I'm a retired engineer, a widower, and I've lived on the same rural property for 33 years, long before the new subdivision sprouted down the road like a row of identical mushrooms, long before the HOA was even an idea. My land isn't fancy, just 22 acres of pines, a meadow, a pond, and the old barn I rebuilt with my own hands after a fire in the early 2000s. It's quiet, peaceful, and honest, a place where you can sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and hear your own thoughts. But peace has a way of attracting chaos. When the subdivision went up 5 years ago, I figured the neighbors would be friendly retirees and families looking for some country air. And for the most part, they were. But then there was the HOA. I'm convinced every HOA is born the same way. 3 people who get a taste of minor power and suddenly think they're Congress. In our case, the trio consisted of Carol, a retired realtor who believed she owned the sun, Morris, a man who measured his worth by how many rules he could recite, and Brittany, an influencer in training who believed aesthetic uniformity was the backbone of civilization. For the first few years, I stayed out of their orbit. I wasn't part of the HOA. My land was inside their plat. I had 0 obligations to them, and I preferred to keep it that way. But they didn't share my enthusiasm for boundaries. It started with small things. Notes left on my fence about visible clutter. It was a wheelbarrow. Complaints about my non-conforming naturalized vegetation. It was grass, actual grass. And my favorite, a formal letter requesting I update my mailbox to match the subdivision standard. I laughed at that one for a week. But the real conflict began the day I noticed fresh survey flags staked along my west boundary. At first, I thought it was the county doing some drainage study. Then I noticed the flags extended deeper onto my land, at least 30 feet past the line. That got my attention. I followed the flags all the way down to a clearing near the subdivision entrance. And there, standing proudly with a measuring tape and clipboard, was Carol herself. She looked up at me like she'd been caught sneaking cookies from the jar. "Barrett, oh, good, you're here," she said with forced brightness. "We're marking out the area for the new community walking trail." Walking trail. I repeated. "Yes," she said. "It'll be beautiful. We're connecting from the cul-de-sac through this area here." She gestured around as if presenting a prize, and looping back along the road. "People will love it." "People who?" I asked. "The residents," she chirped. I stared at her. "This is my land." She didn't blink. "Well, technically." "No," I cut in. "Not technically. Fully, completely, legally. My land." She frowned like someone discovering gravity for the first time and deciding it was personally inconvenient. "Well, we assumed," she began. "That's where you went wrong," I said. Normally that would have been the end of it. A misunderstanding, a correction, a mutual retreat. But not with this group. By the following week, they'd installed a wooden sign reading Future Trailhead Plaza, again on my land. I took it down. They put it back. I took it down again. They sent a letter threatening legal action, which had all the weight of tissue paper since they had no jurisdiction over me whatsoever. Then came the straw that finally snapped the camel's spine clean in two, the invitation. Not to me, to the entire subdivision. A glossy, color-printed flyer slipped into every mailbox announcing, "Grand opening and ribbon-cutting ceremony for our new community trail. Saturday at 10 a.m. Refreshments served. Special guests. Parking available along the meadow path." My meadow path. My meadow. My land. I read that flyer so many times I nearly wore holes in it. I sat on my porch, staring at the sunset, trying to wrap my mind around the audacity. I tried to calm myself. I reminded myself of my blood pressure. I reminded myself of my wife's voice, the way she used to say, "Pick your battles, Barrett." I reminded myself of my age, my sanity, my desire for quiet. But there comes a point in every person's life when they stop swallowing things that don't taste right. Saturday morning arrived like a slow-building headache. Around 9:30, cars started lining the subdivision entrance. Golf carts puttered by. People walked their dogs, chatting excitedly about the new trail. And right there in the middle of a clearing on my property, the HOA set up a podium, a ribbon stretched between two posts, and a table of lemonade. I didn't interrupt. I didn't stomp down there. I didn't yell. I simply called one person. His name is Daniel Whitlock. We've been friends since high school, when he broke his wrist trying to impress a girl by jumping off the roof of the gym. He's the kind of man who'll fix your fence before you even realize it's broken. The kind who still brings his own mother groceries every Sunday. And for the past 8 years, he's also been the county governor. "Morning, Dan," I said when he picked up. "How fast can you get out to my place?" "What's going on?" he asked. "The HOA seems to think they've been promoted to land management." He sighed. "I'm on my way." By 10 o'clock sharp, the ribbon-cutting ceremony was in full swing. Carol stood at the podium, giving a speech so drenched in self-congratulation it could have floated. Morris handed out trail maps printed on heavy cardstock. Brittany filmed everything for social media, narrating in a breathy influencer voice about vision and community synergy. Then a car rolled up the gravel drive. Not a fancy car. Dan's old county truck with a dented bumper and the mud still caked on the wheel wells. He stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and his official county windbreaker. And just his presence, calm, steady, authoritative, made the entire gathering shift uneasily. People murmured. Phones lowered. Even Carol's voice wavered. Dan looked around the clearing, then at the ribbon, then at the crowd. Then he asked one simple question, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who here can tell me who owns this land?" You could have heard a pine needle drop. Carol smoothed her blouse, forced a smile, and said, "Well, this area is intended for community use and—" "That wasn't the question," Dan said. "Who owns this land?" Her mouth opened and closed a few times before she finally said, "Well, we assumed." Dan nodded slowly. "So the answer is you don't know." No one spoke. I walked up beside him, hands in my pockets. Dan's face softened when he saw me, but he didn't smile. He was here in his official capacity now. "This land," he said to the crowd, "belongs entirely to Mr. Barrett Montgomery. Every post, every tree, every inch of this ground. It is not part of the subdivision. It is not part of the HOA. It has never been and will never be. So tell me, who authorized you to hold an event here?" The silence was thick enough to chew. Carol cleared her throat. "We may have acted based on incomplete information." Dan raised an eyebrow. "Incomplete information did not stop you from advertising a public event on private property, constructing insulations on it, and inviting residents to trespass. That's not an assumption. That's negligence. And it's illegal." People began stepping back, quietly, like they just realized they were standing on a rattlesnake. I wasn't angry anymore, not in an explosive sense. What I felt was heavier, a tired kind of disappointment, a sadness that people could be so wrapped up in their own sense of importance that they bulldoze right over someone else's rights without blinking. Dan motioned to the deputy, who'd accompanied him. "Start documenting everything." The HOA trio panicked. "There's no need for law enforcement involvement," Carol said quickly. "There already is," Dan replied. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is trespass, event fraud, and misuse of community funds. Because I assume you used HOA money to throw this party." Her face turned the color of a stop sign. Dan continued, "You're lucky Barrett is more patient than most. If this were anyone else, you'd be getting served civil papers tonight." I wasn't the kind of man to gloat, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good watching their arrogance deflate like a punctured balloon. But the real moment, the one I'll remember for the rest of my life, was when Dan turned to the residents and said, "This is why respecting boundaries matters. Land is not community property just because someone wants it to be. Good neighbors respect each other's rights." bad ones assume they're entitled to whatever they see. That line hit the crowd like a sermon. The HOA was ordered to remove every sign, every stake, every post they'd installed. They were fined. They were placed under county review for misuse of authority. And the community trail was permanently canceled. As people dispersed, a handful approached me with apologies. Real, sincere apologies. Folks who admitted they hadn't realized the HOA had crossed the line. Some were angry at the board, not at me. One older gentleman shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry they did this to you." I'd have been furious. I shrugged. I used to think yelling solved things. Then I got older. He chuckled. Age teaches you that quiet power hits harder. Later, as the last sign was taken down, Dan walked over and leaned against my truck beside me. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I said. "Just wish it hadn't come to this. I'm too old for this nonsense." He nodded. "Most people learn the easy way. Some need a brick to the head." "HOA-shaped brick," I said dryly. He laughed. "Look, Barrett, you handled this the right way. You stood your ground without losing your dignity. A lot of folks are going home today thinking about how easily they let themselves get swept along. Think they'll change?" I asked. "Some," he said. "The others will just get quieter around you." That wasn't a threat. It was a truth. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip behind the pines. The meadow was quiet again, undisturbed, mine, and for the first time in weeks, I could hear the soft rustle of the leaves, the distant frog calls from the pond, and the whisper of the wind sliding down the hill. Peace reclaimed. I thought about my wife, about how she'd probably be shaking her head and chuckling, saying, "You always attract chaos, Barrett." And maybe she was right. Life has a way of throwing things at you when you least expect it. But what matters, what truly matters, is how you respond. You don't have to shout to stand tall. You don't have to fight to win. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply say, "Enough," and mean it. The HOA never tried to touch my land again. Some lessons hurt. Some lessons embarrass. Some lessons come with county officials and legal warnings. But they all teach something. And the lesson that day was simple. Respect the boundaries of others, or you'll eventually run into someone who won't let you pretend they don't exist. As for me, I spent the following week planting wildflowers along that boundary line. A quiet reminder to anyone tempted to cross it again. This land is lived on, watched over, cared for, and very much not available for ribbon cuttings.